You probably picture a mountain as a pyramid, a broad base tapering to a sharp peak, a slope you could, with enough grit, eventually walk up. That is the comforting geometry of the Alps or the Rockies, the shapes we drew as children. But nature is not always comforting. There are anomalies on this planet where the Earth doesn't slope, it shears. Places where the horizon turns 90 degrees and the ground beneath your feet vanishes into a kilometer of absolute nothingness. You might believe Everest is the ultimate challenge, the apex of danger. But the data suggests that in the world of pure verticality, altitude is secondary to exposure. Here, gravity is not just a constant force, it is a predator waiting for a single mistake. These are the vertical limits of our world. Let me show you the faces that defy physics. You're watching Unclimbed Earth, where the map ends. If you value this depth of exploration into the planet's most hostile corners, subscribing ensures you don't miss the next journey into the unknown. To understand the terror of a truly vertical mountain, you must first unlearn what you know about climbing. Traditional mountaineering is a war of attrition against oxygen and exhaustion, but verticality is a war against the mind. When you stand at the base of a sheer face, you are looking at a geological error, a place where the planet's crust has been torn open or scoured clean by forces so violent they leave behind only polished stone. These are not slopes, they are walls, and the most extreme among them are found not in the populated valleys of Europe, but in the desolate, freezing frontiers where few humans ever tread. We begin by defining the metric that matters most here, the vertical drop. This is the measure of the longest continuous line you could drop a stone along without it hitting anything until it reaches the bottom. On most dangerous mountains, a fall means tumbling down a steep incline. On the mountains we are investigating today, a fall means flying. The air rushes past you for 10, 20, sometimes 40 seconds before impact. This specific kind of geological formation requires a perfect storm of tectonic pressure and glacial erosion, creating environments that are hostile to all forms of life.
Consider the sensory experience of the Arctic Circle. The silence here is heavy, broken only by the crack of shifting ice and the wind howling through granite corridors. It is here, on Baffin Island in the Canadian territory of Nunavut, that we find the undisputed king of verticality. This is Mount Thor. To the uninitiated, the name might conjure images of a towering, jagged spike, but Thor is something far more intimidating. It is a fortress. It features the greatest purely vertical drop on Earth, 1,250 meters. That is over 4,000 feet of straight down. To visualize this, stack 3 Empire State Buildings on top of one another, remove all the windows, turn the surface into freezing granite, and stand at the very top. If you were to jump, you wouldn't just fall. Because the cliff actually overhangs at an average angle of 105 degrees, you would drift away from the wall, falling through empty space for over a kilometer before you struck the scree at the valley floor. The existence of Mount Thor is a testament to the power of ice. During the last ice age, massive glaciers carved through this rock like a hot knife through butter, shearing away the mountainside and leaving behind this impossible face. It sits in the Oyuittuk National Park, a name which translates to the land that never melts. The environment is stark, monochromatic, and lethal. There is no vegetation to soften the landscape, only gray rock and white ice. The sheer scale of the wall distorts your perception of distance. From the valley floor, the summit doesn't look like a mountain peak. It looks like the edge of the world. Climbers who have attempted this face describe a unique psychological pressure. Unlike Everest, where the summit is a singular point to reach, the face of Thor is a constant, looming presence. You are not climbing a ridge, you are navigating a sea of vertical granite. The rock is cold, often rimmed with frost, and the sun rarely touches the deeper sections of the wall. It creates a perpetual twilight, a shadow realm where time seems to freeze. The isolation here is absolute. If you get into trouble on the face of Thor, there is no quick rescue. You are days away from civilization, suspended by your fingertips over a drop that gives you enough time to think about your fate before you reach the bottom. This creates a paradox in the world of extreme geography. We are drawn to these places because they seem impossible, yet their very existence demands that we try to conquer them. But Mount Thor is just the beginning. As we move from the frozen north to the high-altitude ranges of the Karakoram, the definition of verticality shifts. it becomes less about the single drop and more about the sustained, exhausting vertical gain that stretches not just for a kilometer, but into the death zone itself. The geology changes from the scoured valleys of the Arctic to the jagged tectonic collisions of Asia.
The transition from the granite slabs of Canada to the spires of Pakistan reveals a different kind of danger. In the Arctic, the cold is wet and penetrating. In the Karakoram, the air is thin and the sun burns, but the walls remain. They stand as monuments to the planet's violent history, silent witnesses to millions of years of erosion and uplift. To approach them is to step back in time, to an era when the Earth was still being forged. These vertical faces are the bones of the planet, stripped bare for us to witness. And as we examine them, we realize that the most extreme environments are not just measured in height or temperature, but in their absolute indifference to human life. The sheer walls do not care if we climb them. They simply exist, vast and terrifying, challenging us to look up and wonder what it would take to survive the ascent. This indifference is nowhere more palpable than in the Baltoro Glacier region of Pakistan, home to the most concentrated collection of vertical spires on the planet. Here, the concept of a mountain shifts from a pyramid to a needle. The Trango towers do not slope, they shoot upward, geological anomalies that defy the logic of gravity. The Great Trango Tower, specifically its east face, presents the world's greatest nearly vertical drop. Imagine standing at the base of a cliff that rises straight up for 1,340 meters. That is twice the height of the world's tallest buildings, but instead of glass and steel, you are faced with relentless golden granite. Geologically, this is a masterpiece of resistance. Millions of years ago, a massive pluton of magma cooled deep underground, forming a hard crystalline core. As the softer rock around it eroded away under the grinding weight of glaciers, these cores remained, sculpted into the monolithic towers we see today. But to the climber, geology is secondary to survival. On a wall this steep, there are no ledges to rest on. You live in the vertical realm for weeks, suspended over the void in a portal edge, a fabric cot hanging from a single anchor point. The psychological strain of this environment is unique among Earth's extremes. You are not just fighting the cold or the altitude, you are fighting a constant visceral pull of the abyss that never relents, not even when you sleep.
The specific danger of the Karakoram is the combination of altitude and technical difficulty. Usually, as you go higher into the death zone, the climbing becomes a slog, walking up steep snow. But here, at over 6,000 meters, you are performing gymnastics on fingertips of rock. The air is too thin to support the muscular exertion required for such technical movement, forcing the body into a state of rapid deterioration. The sun creates a paradox of temperature. The rock can burn your hands in the direct solar radiation of the thin atmosphere, yet the moment a shadow passes, the temperature plummets 30 degrees instantly. It is a binary environment of freezing and burning, all taking place on a surface that offers no shelter. If exploring the mechanics of these unforgiving landscapes deepens your understanding of our planet's extremes, supporting this channel ensures we can continue mapping the unclimbed. A simple interaction helps these stories reach further into the unknown. While the Karakoram offers the challenge of altitude and solar radiation, shifting our focus to the southern hemisphere reveals a vertical nightmare defined by a different element: wind. In the Patagonian Andes, specifically the massif containing Cerro Torre and Fitzroy, the verticality is weaponized by the atmosphere. This is not the dry, thin air of Asia. This is the collision zone of the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. There is no landmass to slow the winds circling Antarctica, so they slam into the Patagonian spire with the force of a hurricane year-round. Cerro Torre was long considered the impossible mountain, not because of its height, it is relatively low compared to the giants of the Himalayas, but because of its geometry and its armor. The summit is guarded by a phenomenon known as rime ice mushrooms. These are not geological features, but atmospheric ones. The moisture-laden winds freeze instantly upon contact with the vertical rock, building bizarre, gravity-defying sculptures of ice that cling to the walls like parasites. These ice formations can grow outward horizontally for dozens of meters, unsupported, hanging over 5,000 feet of nothingness. To climb here is to engage in a battle with the wind itself. The granite is smooth and shut tight, offering few cracks for protection, and the rime ice is useless for anchoring gear. It is a vertical maze where the walls are often coated in a layer of fair glass, a thin, transparent veneer of ice that renders the rock unclimbable. The
terrifying reality of Patagonia is that the vertical environment is alive. The wind screams with a physical force that can rip a climber from the wall, and the temperature fluctuates just enough to turn the ice mushrooms into falling bombs the size of cars.
Unlike the silent, brooding danger of the Trango Towers, Cerro Torre is loud. It is a chaotic environment where the sensory overload can induce panic. The storms here do not arrive with warning. They manifest instantly, trapping climbers on the vertical faces in the fortress, a trap of wind and whiteout conditions where the concept of up and down is lost to the swirling snow. Yet, even these windswept spires obey the laws of physics. There are places, however, where the verticality creates its own weather, microclimates so isolated and extreme that they mimic the conditions of other planets. As we move from the wind-scoured tips of South America to the frozen unknowns of the polar regions, the definition of verticality begins to merge with the definition of the impossible. The walls get colder, the isolation deeper, and the margin for error vanishes entirely. Deep within the Antarctic interior, specifically in the Fenris Wolf Range of Queen Maud Land, this margin is non-existent. Here, the mountains do not simply rise from the ground, they pierce through an ice sheet that is kilometers thick, emerging like black granite fangs from a white ocean. The crown jewel of this alien landscape is Ulvantana Peak, known as the Wolf's Tooth. Unlike the crumbling limestone of the Dolomites or the snow-plastered faces of the Himalayas, Ulvantana is a monolith of impeccable, bullet-hard granite. It is aesthetically perfect, a geometric pyramid soaring nearly 3,000 meters into a sky that remains permanently illuminated during the austral summer. But this perfection is a lure. Climbing here requires a recalibration of what is survivable. The rock is not just steep, it is frozen. The ambient air temperature hovers at 20 degrees below zero on a warm day, but the katabatic winds accelerating down the polar plateau strip heat from the human body in seconds. Touching the rock with bare skin results in immediate frostbite, yet the technical difficulty of the vertical faces often demands the dexterity of bare fingers. Climbers here are fighting a war on two fronts, the vertical challenge of the wall and the horizontal assault of the polar environment. It is a place of absolute silence, broken only by the wind and the shattering of ice. The isolation is total. If a rescue is needed, help is not hours away. It is days, perhaps weeks, dependent entirely on the mercy of storms that circle the bottom of the world. Documenting these remote frontiers requires digging into archives and expeditions that few ever see. If this journey into the extremes of our planet captures your imagination, a like helps these stories reach others fascinated by the unknown.
Moving from the bottom of the world to the top, we find a different kind of vertical anomaly on Baffin Island in the Canadian Arctic. This is the home of Mount Thor. While not the highest peak, Thor holds a title that makes it unique in the annals of geology. It possesses the greatest purely vertical drop on Earth. The west face drops 1,250 meters straight down. To visualize this, imagine stacking 3 Empire State Buildings on top of each other, then jumping from the top. You would not hit the sides. In fact, you would drift away from the wall. Mount Thor is not just vertical, it is overhanging. The face maintains an average angle of 105 degrees. This creates a terrifying geometric reality for climbers. Once you leave the ground, you are essentially dangling in a void. If you drop a piece of gear, it doesn't bounce. It simply vanishes, falling for over a kilometer before striking the talus below. The psychological strain of this exposure is crushing. There are no ledges to rest on, no places to stand and regain composure. You are suspended in a harness, spinning slowly in the Arctic air, separated from the rock by the very rope that keeps you alive. The granite here is old, some of the oldest on the planet, and while it is solid, the sheer scale of the face creates its own gravitational pull, a constant reminder of the abyss waiting below. Yet pure rock faces, for all their terror, are predictable. Rock does not change overnight. But when you combine extreme verticality with high altitude, you enter the death zone of technical climbing. This brings us to the Karakoram Range in Pakistan, specifically to the Lotok Group. While the Trango Towers are famous for their spires, Lotok 1 presents a challenge that remained unsolved for decades, the North Ridge. For 40 years, the North Ridge of Lotok 1 was the unfinished business of the climbing world.
It is a knife edge of rock and ice rising 2.5 vertical kilometers, topping out at over 7,000 meters. This is where the definition of extreme shifts from technical difficulty to physiologically impossible. At this altitude, the body is dying. The blood thickens, the brain swells, and decision-making falters. On a standard high-altitude peak, climbers trudge up snow slopes. On Latok, they must perform gymnastic, high-grade rock and ice climbing movements, while gasping for oxygen in air that holds only 40.
The ridge is relentless. It does not offer a single comfortable bivouac site for thousands of feet. Climbers must hack small ledges out of the ice or hang in hammocks battered by the jet stream. The 1978 American attempt on this ridge is legendary, not for its success, but for its survival. They spent 26 days on the wall, pushing higher than anyone would for the next 40 years, eventually retreating as sickness overtook the team. They descended into a storm, rappelling down the endless void while hallucinating from exhaustion. Their struggle highlighted a brutal truth about these vertical environments. The mountain does not need to kill you with a fall. It simply needs to keep you there long enough for your own biology to fail. As we analyze these vertical prisons, we must consider the ultimate escalation. We have seen wind, we have seen cold, and we have seen altitude. But there is one final variable that turns a vertical wall into a game of Russian roulette: instability. There is a mountain face in the Alps, infamous not for its height, but for its history of murder. It is a place where the verticality is composed of loose rock and ice that is held together only by the freezing temperatures. The Eiger North Face in Switzerland is the physical manifestation of this nightmare. Locals have long referred to it as the Mordwand, the murder wall, a linguistic warning that is entirely literal. Unlike the granite monoliths of Patagonia or the Arctic, which are solid and indifferent, the Eiger is crumbling and hostile. Its topography is uniquely malevolent. The face is concave, shaped like a massive amphitheater. This geological quirk means that every rock dislodged from the summit and every chunk of ice melting in the midday sun is funneled toward the center of the wall. To be on the face is to be inside the barrel of a gun while the mountain pulls the trigger, over and over again. The history here is written in impact craters and severed ropes. The tragedy of 1936 remains the defining horror of vertical mountaineering, where Tony Kurz was left suspended on a rope in the open air, dying of exposure just meters from his rescuers, unable to pass a knot through a carabiner. It demonstrated that on a vertical face, proximity to safety is an illusion. You can be within shouting distance of a warm train station inside the mountain's tunnel windows, yet be utterly beyond help, trapped in a vertical sarcophagus of wind and ice. The Eiger introduces the psychological terror that defines the most extreme vertical environments, the knowledge that the terrain itself is conspiring against you.
This instability is evolving into a new, more volatile threat as we move deeper into the 21st century. The permafrost that acts as the glues holding these high-altitude vertical faces together is degrading. In the Alps, the Himalayas, and the Andes, routes that were considered stable 50 years ago are now disintegrating. Massive sheets of rock, the size of apartment buildings, are peeling off the mountainsides as the ice behind them melts. We are entering an era where the most extreme vertical walls on Earth are becoming unclimbable, not because of their technical difficulty, but because they are physically falling apart. The challenge is shifting from a test of skill to a game of statistical probability. If you value the documentation of these shifting geological frontiers and the history of those who dare to tread on them, subscribing to the channel ensures we can continue to fund these deep dive investigations into the planet's most hostile edges. This disintegration brings us back to the core mystery of the vertical world. Why do we go? Why do humans look at the smooth granite face of Mount Thor, the freezing void of the Trango Towers, or the crumbling rot of the Eiger, and see a path? It is perhaps because these places represent the absolute limit of control. In our horizontal lives, we engineer safety. We build roads, we regulate temperatures, we mitigate risk. But on a vertical wall, safety is not given. It is manufactured moment by moment through finger strength, friction, and mental fortitude. The vertical world is the only place left on Earth where a single mistake has immediate, non-negotiable consequences. When we look at the sheer face of the Great Trango Tower, we are looking at a rejection of biology. We are bipedal creatures evolved for the plains, yet we force ourselves into a vertical axis where blood pools in our harnesses and gravity fights every heartbeat. These mountains are the planet's way of showing us the scale of our insignificance.
A vertical drop of 4,000 feet does not care if you are brave, and it does not care if you are skilled. It only dictates the laws of physics. The allure of the vertical is the allure of the absolute. There is no ambiguity on a sheer face. You are either attached to the mountain or you are not. You are either moving upward or you are dying. In a world of complexities and gray areas, the brutal binary of the vertical wall is strangely comforting. It offers a clarity that cannot be found on flat ground. These walls, from the Arctic Circle to the Karakoram, stand as the final guardians of the wild. They are the unclimbed, the unconquered, and the unforgiving. They remind us that no matter how much we map the world, there are still places where we do not belong, places where the earth stands up and dares us to try.